Hi everybody, and this is another tutorial video for Krunker, in which I will be showcasing what I personally find to be the most optimal settings to use in order to make playing Krunker a little bit easier. So what I've done, to my horrible dismay, is that I have reset the game to completely base settings. So if you've never touched the settings menu, this should be exactly what your game looks like. You've got the ammo counter on the bottom right, which will never move, but just to describe every HUD element for you if you're new to the game, is the bottom right's your ammo and your currently selected weapon and your available weapons. The bottom left is your health and the class you're playing, as well as the chat box. The kill feed will also show up in the same box the chat box shows up in. The timer on the top left to show you how much time is left in the round. Don't worry, normal games don't last an hour. This is a custom lobby I've set up. Your ping to the current server you're currently on, which is to the right of the timer, which is the number of milliseconds it takes for your game to reach the server. It's basically how laggy you are. The game mode and the current map being played are right underneath the timer. The scoreboard showing what position and what points each player has in the server, and the kill count of you personally. How many people you've killed in this match is the skull there. So that's every piece of the HUD, as well as in the middle, of course, your crosshair. The bigger it gets, the more inaccurate you are. And, you know, basic stuff. But if you've ever played any other first-person shooters, you might be thinking, wow, the FOV seems really tight. And if you've ever played some really customizable shooters like Team Fortress 2 or Quake, you might be thinking, oh, I would really love to be able to turn that view model off. And there's a couple ways to alleviate those problems, as well as many others. So if you hit escape, or while you're dead, go to the settings menu, and you can set a litany of different options. The resolution at which the game runs at, the lower it goes, the more pixelated the game is. If you have a low specs machine, if your computer does not run things very well, turning this down will make the game run at a higher frame rate. I recommend, if you have a decent machine, and if you really don't have a decent enough machine to run this game at 100% resolution, then I'd probably look into getting a better computer. But personally, I think everybody should be able to run this at one resolution. It gives you the least visual clutter, everything's very clear, and it doesn't make the game run any worse. If you crank it beyond 1, I don't have a 4K monitor, so I can't exactly tell you if this is true, but I'm almost certain this is for monitors that are more, that have a bigger resolution than 1920 by 1080. I think these are meant for 4K monitors, these resolution options. As far as I'm aware, they don't do anything for you in-game, and they don't make the performance any better. So I wouldn't really go beyond 1 unless you have a really, really big resolution monitor. But yeah, anywhere in between 0 and 1 is fine. Just pick whatever is best for your machine and best for your eyes. Particles, I would recommend turning these off. They're just visually distracting. This is personal preference, but I would play around for a bit with this setting turned off and go from there and see if you like having the particles on or off. I personally don't. Bullet trails, I also have this turned off, and muzzle flash. I have both of these turned off, and I really strongly recommend you keep them off, because bullet trails for other people still show up, as well as your own, I think. I think what this does is take the visual effect around bullet trails off, but it doesn't actually remove them. So I would personally turn this off. And muzzle flash, if you leave this on, turn the game on, see how, you may not be able to see it, but I promise if you get in game and test it yourself, it's there. Every time you shoot a gun, well, not every time, but occasionally while shooting a gun, there will be flashes at the end of the gun that cause a huge flash on your screen. Just super visually distracting. You don't want that. It doesn't help you at all. So turn that off. These options, I recommend keeping every single one of these that is currently ticked still on, except for maybe you don't have to care about showing unboxings. Who cares about that? If you don't care, turn it off. I like keeping it on. Doesn't really matter to me. Doesn't affect me. Show player messages if you think everybody in chat is just being toxic. If you're playing in a lobby where people are just, you know, throwing F-word this, whatever. Just if you're sick of the people being toxic in chat, you can turn this off. Otherwise, you can keep it on. Doesn't matter. Completely personal preference for these two options. But this, just everything about this, I would keep on other than these two. I would turn on show FPS so you can see what frame rate you're getting, if that is important to you. It's important to me and a lot of other first-person shooter players, so obviously keep that turned on. Show deaths, I personally don't keep it on because I feel like it would just tilt me if I saw how many deaths I had in game. But if you play competitive Krunker, it can be very helpful to have this turned on. It doesn't really matter if you care about your deaths mid-game, then turn it on. You can see how many deaths you got at the end of the game on the scoreboard anyway, but I keep this turned off for the majority of the time that I play. So, one of the biggest first major changes that you can make to your client is the crosshair. So, by default, obviously it's going to be on default. But, if I go to custom, I can create my own. I can go to a cross, a hollow, and I can show you what all of these look like. We'll turn on always show. We'll change it to green, which is what I use. We'll give it a green, and then shadow is the outline of the crosshair, which I will leave it black. So we'll leave it at size 16, and we'll give it 2 thickness, and we'll see what that looks like in game. So now you can see where before, if I go to default crosshair, I had a dynamic crosshair that changed depending on how accurate I was at the time. However, if I turn on my custom crosshair, it now is always fixed. It never moves, and when I aim down sight, my red dot displays above it. So it's helpful if you already are used to the inaccuracy of the guns, or if you're not worried about it, because when you're aimed down sight, you're perfectly accurate. Anyway, it helps to have a custom crosshair that isn't dynamic because it can be a little distracting. At least that's what I personally feel. But feel free to experiment with all of these options. For example, there's layered crosshairs. There's you can just copy paste an image off of the internet and put a custom crosshair there, and it can be anything you want. I personally, what I do is I go with the solid circle. I take it down to size 4, thickness 2, and green color. And this is the crosshair I use. However, what I also do is have it on always show, and then I have the... Actually, we'll come back to that in a minute. Forget I've said anything. But this is the crosshair I use, is this one, the solid green dot. But feel free to experiment with that and pick your own. Oh. Where is, Oh, there we go. Alright, sorry. Bugged out there for a second. So, that's the crosshair options. Feel free to experiment with that as you will. The sensitivity settings, feel free to as well change these to your liking. This is just how fast your mouse moves, or how fast your viewpoint in-game moves with how much you move your mouse. The lower, the slower it'll be, the more you have to move your mouse. The higher, the faster it'll be, the less you have to move your mouse. This is pretty basic stuff. If you've ever played a first-person shooter, this should be pretty simple, but feel free to change these until you're comfortable. Now, one of the most important things on this entire menu that I strongly recommend you change is the field of view. You can already see what it does just through the side here, but it starts you off at 70 by default. So we'll take a look at that in game, and you can see I can't really see a lot on my screen right now. So let's see, what can we get for a good example here? So if I stand right here, I can see the fountain and just a bit to the right to my screen. So now if I up my field of view and we take it to what I use, which is 110, I can see all of the right of my screen standing here. I can see so much more on my screen. Now the downside of this that a lot of people don't like, which I personally don't mind as I'm used to it, but there are a lot of people who come from other games where they dislike how big, how small targets are when they have a lower FOV, because they can see so much. Things in the center of their viewpoint will be quote-unquote farther away. They're not actually farther away, they just appear to be because of your field of view, making it a little harder to hit people. I personally don't have a problem with this, but if you are somebody who might, I would recommend taking it down a little bit. But I personally use 110. I'm very used to it from playing Quake. The weapon FOV simply changes how close and how far away your weapon is to yourself. This is a matter of personal preference. I personally don't even play with my view model turned on, which I will get to you in a minute. But this changes how close and far away your weapon is. Feel free to experiment with that as you see fit. Invert Y-axis, that's an option where now I'm kind of in like flight stick mode, where if I look up, if I push my mouse up, I'll look down, and if I push my mouse down, I'll look up. If you have played games like that, feel free. I can't do it. You know, it's there if you need it. Sound options, this is pretty this is pretty self-explanatory. There's your sound for all the sound in the game. There's your voice volume for all the volume, or for all the voice chat volume. Set these to what you like. I usually have my in-game sound at half. Now this is how you turn your view model on and off. You can already see it behind the options menu. If I click off show weapon, it means I will never see my weapon, ever, no matter what I do. No matter if I swap weapons, no matter what. It will always be off my screen. So, that's what I play with personally. The weapon bobbing, now if you have your weapon view model turned on and you enjoy that and you want to keep it that way, what view model bobbing does is if I walk forward a lot, you can see how my weapon kind of bounces up and down. If you don't like that, you can turn it off by setting it to 0, and now it's perfectly still. It's not bouncing around at all. However, if you like it and you in fact can't get enough of it, you can turn it up, and it kind of makes a little bit of a silly effect, especially when you slide. For example, if you pull out your pistol, it's like almost completely sideways. But I personally don't like it. I have my view model turned off anyway. Now, depth map, this is exclusively something that people use for like screenshotting. I wouldn't worry about this at all unless you're, you know, a screenshotter or, you know, making skins or whatever. I really couldn't even tell you what the practical applications of that. I would just avoid it. Green screen, again, for editing, just puts a big green screen on your screen and you can take pictures of your gun. Shaders, ambient shading, I recommend turning this off. I don't find it very helpful. It just makes the game slower and gives it a bit unnecessary shading where things might be slightly harder to see. It really doesn't provide an advantage. If you care about your game looking nicer, you can keep it on. I turn it off. Now these are for your mods. This is, if you get around to messing with mods, feel free to touch this, but I personally don't use any mods. Lots of people do. Feel free to look into that yourself. I won't be talking about them here. Auto load mods, if you have mods installed, you want to tick that on so that every time you load the game, it'll load them back up. Scope borders. Now, if you use a custom scope, here, I'll show you. Let me get on Hunter, and I'll have to restart the game because nobody's in here to kill me. So we will do that right now, where we will turn every map off and put it on private and set the minutes to 60 again. So if I restart and I'm playing Hunter, we'll turn my weapon on just so it's a little easier to understand. So if I scope in, normally this is what the scope looks like, right? You can see everything, or you can't see everything around you other than what's in the scope viewpoint. So if you turn the scope borders off, now the default scope is kind of a little bugged and the edges of the scope are still there, but you can see much more of your peripheral vision. It's a lot easier to see around you. So when you're scoped in, this can be very advantageous. And I would recommend looking into getting a custom scope image, which I had one, and now I've lost it, which unfortunately, if you can see me watching Tyler one there. Let me look up, we'll just look up a Krunker scope, for example. Let's find one. Images. We'll just throw, how about this one? This one's not bad. Copy image. So, let's say you go on Google and you look up Krunker scope. You'll grab the URL of the scope and you will paste it here in scope image. And right away you'll see it's changed. This one's not properly formatted, but hopefully you'll find one that is. And you can see that just by pasting the URL, you now have a completely different scope image. Let's see if I can show you what I use. Blank. Let's just get blank PNG. Let's copy the image address, sorry about that, and paste that. And so now I just have a completely blank scope. And now I just use my crosshair to aim, but while I'm also zoomed in. So that's what I use, but feel free, there's tons of different custom scopes you can use. I recommend getting one if you play a lot of sniper. Now, red dot image, I'm going to actually put the same exact thing because I have my crosshair toggled to be always on. I don't want the red dot to cover up my gun. So if you're using like the AK or the SMG, when you aim down sight, the red dot will cover up on top of your crosshair. But by putting a blank image in that section of the options right here, red dot image, that won't show up anymore. Now, every time a match ends, you can put in a little custom message, like my Twitch URL, if I can spell it. And then profile image, this is just, see if I put a blank, see in the bottom left it's just blank. You can put whatever you want there. It's just so it's not a picture of your character anymore, it is instead just a personal picture that you like. Feel free to put whatever you want. It's like your profile picture on any website, except nobody else can see it, only you. And that should be about every option. You can also rebind your keys, so if you don't like any of the keys that are currently bound by default, you can feel free to change them. This is actually something that I completely didn't even know about until today, so perfect. Feel free to rebind these, although I think some options like scroll wheel down and up, if you play a lot of source games or other games where you can rebind jump to scroll wheel up and down for b-hopping ease. Unfortunately, you're not able to do that in this, but I'm pretty sure any key or button on your, on your computer is going to work. So, that should cover all the controls and options, and feel free to experiment with them, but that is everything I would recommend turning on or off for a easy gameplay experience. If this helped you out, I'm glad, and have fun playing Krunker.